Good evening. I'm Katie Stover, Director of Reader Services for Kansas City Public Library. Welcome to what will surely be one of the most special online author events KCPL has ever hosted. Before I bring on tonight's guest, Alice Randall, let me invite you to the waiting room of Black Bottom Saints. If you recognize the music, that's because it's a Scott Joplin rag arranged by Kebmo pianist David M. Rogers. In time to the music, you'll see quite a few familiar faces and some new ones, and we'll talk about them later. But these color portraits of all the saints were done by Jimmy James Green. So sit back and enjoy our pre-show entertainment. I'll be back to introduce Alice Randall in about 3 minutes. Hello again, everyone. Wasn't that something? And you haven't seen the last of tonight's surprises. Alice Randall and her latest novel, Black Bottom Saints, are full of them. So if you haven't gotten a copy yet, please visit the website of your favorite online book retailer. If you use bookshop.org, then you know that bookshop.org supports local independent bookstores with every purchase. I told you tonight would be full of surprises, not the least of which is our guest speaker, Alice Randall. Her first novel, The Wind Done Gone, is an alternative account of the story told in Gone with the Wind. It became an immediate bestseller. Maybe you've heard Alice on the airwaves. She's an accomplished country music songwriter. Steve Earle, Glenn Campbell, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, and Trisha Yearwood have recorded Alice's songs. And if you sang X's and O's in the car along with Trisha, you were singing with Alice too. In addition to the 5 adult novels that she's written, Alice published an award-winning young adult novel, The Diary of B.B. Bright. Her articles have appeared in periodicals from O Magazine to Elle to American Songwriter and the Los Angeles Times. Her students at Vanderbilt University love her, where she is writer in residence and teaches courses in country lyrics, African-American children's literature, beginning fiction, and a course on the Federalist Papers. I need to stop right there so we can get to the rest of the evening. Please welcome Alice Randall to talk about her latest novel, Black Bottom Saints. Good evening, Alice.
Katie, I'm so excited to be with you and to be virtually in Kansas City. I've been invited to a lot of cities and I've only chosen 1 or 2 or 3 because I am teaching this semester, and I would not have missed Kansas City because I love the twinned music tradition you have here, but I would have fallen in love with this library. They are lucky to have you, and great cities, we say in Nashville, have great libraries, and you've got a great library and you're a great city. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for saying so. We believe it as well. Alice, if I understand correctly, all the saints in Black Bottom Saints are real people, including the narrator. What makes this book a novel?
Well, it's historical fiction, which means that it is built, the bones include real facts and real people. But one of the things when you're thinking about Black history and going back even just as recently as the 19th century and the early days of the 20th century, my own grandfather could not read or write, and I knew my grandfather well. He was born in about 1888. I was born in 1959. And so there's so much that isn't documented. There's so much that the interior lives of people who didn't keep journals, but who told their stories in air. They didn't write it down on paper, but they told them in air. And so one of the reasons, I say this is the novel, Black Bottom Saints, that took me half a century of living and writing 4 earlier novels to get to, is by far my best one. But all of my novels speak to the interior lives of illiterate people. All of my novels speak to what is not documented or what is actually falsely documented, particularly in the lives of Black people and women. And so with fiction, I say it's the lie that tells the deeper truth. I am invited to imagine not just the events that occurred that we can document, but I'm invited to also bricolage and patchwork in all the stories told in air that I have inherited, that I gathered interviewing. So it is my imagining. Ultimately, any work of fiction, you're documenting one person's imagination. My imagination is dancing with Ziggy's imagination as I remembered it. So finally, this is not the truth. It is Alice's fiction of Ziggy's imaginary life, because my Ziggy is writing a Saints Day book. So that he actually is writing something that he thinks is a work of nonfiction. He is putting the lives of his Black bottom secular saints in front of all of his students to save their lives. But it's a work of fiction because I have embroidered my perspective, my imaginings, my hopes, and my dreams, my taste, my choices. It's subjective. But I think it is the lie that tells a greater truth. And it's very, very deep and long researched. It's told from the perspective of one Ziggy Johnson, who was a real person. As you said, almost all the people in it are real. I spent about 7 years doing the research for this book, including 3 years in which I was working largely with columns that Ziggy published between 48 and 68 that are in a newspaper, the Michigan Chronicle, that is still yet to be digitized. And so I actually had to find them churning microfilm in the bottom of a library. And if it wasn't for libraries, these microfilms would never have been saved for me to find this part of Ziggy's telling of Ziggy's truth.
Why a Saints Day book for a structure?
Great question. One, when I'm looking at the diversity of the Black experience, some people associate Blackness with the Baptist religion, with a certain kind of Black evangelical Christianity, the AME church. But there's a long, deep tradition of Black Catholics that often get overlooked, and Black Lutherans, and Black Episcopals, all of which are shouted out to in this novel. But quite specifically, Ziggy, the historical Ziggy, was born in Chicago, up south, but his mama was from Mississippi, and she was part of one of the oldest Black Catholic congregation in Mississippi. So he was a cradle to grave Catholic, an altar boy who will be buried in a Requiem Catholic Mass, and the Catholic Church meant a lot to him. But more importantly, artistically, when I first started researching this book, I was imagining a more traditional novel that was a year in the life of Ziggy, beginning on Father's Day, because it was the most important day of his year, when he'd have this extravaganza, because Ziggy owned a dancing school, a school of the theater. He also was an MC, master of ceremony at these hot clubs, the 20 Grand, the Flame, and he was a gossip columnist for a Black newspaper. Those were his three hats. So, and I got to attend the Ziggy Johnson School of the Theater. So as I said, you were asking about why this Saints Day book. I started researching it. It was going to be a year in the life of Ziggy, starting with the high point of the year, the big extravaganza for his school, this big kids recital that was so cool. Sammy Davis, the Mills Brothers would show up for this. Literally the Supremes performed on one of his kiddie shows on Father's Day. But when I started writing this book, 7 years of researching, started writing it 4 years ago, we were going to a very broken time in the history of America. It was the beginning of the Trump administration, and America was getting increasingly divided. And it occurred to me we needed a book of virtues. It occurred to me that Ziggy might want to write his own profiles in courage. It occurred to me that we all needed something like the Canterbury Tales to bring us all together. And I thought of some great Midwestern books such as Spoon River Anthology. And before I knew it, Ziggy was writing a Saints Day book. That was pure Detroit swagger and a little bit of Midwestern wisdom.
Talk a little bit about how you paired cocktails with a Saints Day book, but then we'll talk more about the cocktail element later.
Simply put, Ziggy starts to write his book. If I had to make a short version of the plot of this novel, this is the man who set out to save a little girl that one woman set out to destroy. Or I would show you a picture of a little girl and I would say, this is a little girl one man sent 61 saints to save. And it worked. So there is a wraparound every woman character, and she's called Colored Girl or CG, but she's every person. And she has some really hard things to happen to her. The book is in many ways about private and public trauma. But the biggest theme of the book is joy is radical. One of the great lines of the book is be nice to yourself, amen. But joy is radical is a primary theme of the novel. So my question from the beginning structurally is, how do you write a novel about joy? And that is also about moving from trauma to transcendence. It's a novel about a particular hope. It's a novel about the hope that everybody can move from trauma to transcendence. How do you write a novel about trauma and about public and private trauma and keep it joyful? I say you put in some libations, and each chapter ends with a libation that is a 5 sense addressed to joy, to the sight, the sound, the touch, the taste, and the scent of joy. Not every one of the libations has a spirit in it, but they all address all 5 senses. And that 5 sense address to joy is something Ziggy learned in the church as an altar boy, with the scent of the the incense in the church, the beautiful stained glass, the music, the silk of the chasuble robes. He learned in the church something that he took into the show bars, and we import into the novel, into cocktails. And you say, where's the sound? When you shake, 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 or you stir, 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 there's the rhythm. A cocktail can be a percussive instrument, just like a piano. And in Black Bottom Saints, because we're always reminding ourselves, even if we're shaking up a lemonade and putting mint in it, that in our hardest days, we must address the potential for joy and hope. So each chapter ends with a libation. I also want to remind us, because I do that soul food history at Vanderbilt and Southern food history, that when we look at the global South and we look to Africa pre-colonial, that in pre-colonial Africa, there was distilling of palm wine and beer and very little over drinking. That the history of libation goes back to pre-colonial Africa, that we will have the Mount Vernon, George Washington's plantation. There are numerous enslaved African men distilling spirits there. And that two of the greatest cocktail artists in history are Bricktop, who will open bars in Paris and in Mexico City and in Rome, and Thomas Bullock, who will be known for bars in Louisville and in St. Louis. But you have amazing bars in Kansas City. And these bars are places where Black people were creating taste metaphors and narrations in taste in a cocktail. They were creating art that wasn't recognized as art. And one of the things I like doing with this novel is inviting us to recognize art that isn't recognized as art, including cocktails.
This is going to be very helpful for an event I do in November with Nell Painter, and I will ask her about art. This description you gave could easily describe the Black Bottom neighborhood in Detroit, one that's got some trauma and joy and all these marvelous people that bring those elements to that neighborhood. Can you tell us a little bit about that neighborhood, what it was like then and possibly what it's like today?
Yes, I'd love to. Black Bottom is a neighborhood on the Lower East Side of Detroit. We have history going there to indigenous people in the 15th century. The Black Bottom I'm writing about is mid-century, and by mid-century, I mean mid-20th century Detroit. I'm focused on Black Bottom between 48 and 68, or even the roots of Black Bottom between 28 and 68, because by 68, it's almost completely destroyed. But for a period, in the 40s, in the 50s, in the very early days of the 60s, there was a moment of extraordinary Black art, activism, athletics, politics, and economic engine, a caramel Camelot. And it was located in a place called Black Bottom. It's almost on the Detroit River, the furthest edge of it looking to Canada. And it is an attitude as much as a geography. People debate the parameters of the lines of it, but it's a chin up swagger. It's a kind of excellence. It's a place where audience is highly significant, where men particularly who are going out and working on assembly lines, but women too, working in Henry Ford's factories for $5 a day would get off the shift and they would go hear music and they would look at art, painting, photography. They would buy books. That they weren't just workers, they were an extraordinary audience. And they were an extraordinary audience that had a chance to create an interior Black aesthetic yardstick at which to judge their art. And once they judged it, they invited everybody in. I say that the roots of Black girl magic run straight to Detroit. I was born in 59 and 60, we know from the census. I think there are about 122,000 Black girls in Detroit. I say I had 122,000 co-writers on this book. The roots of Black girl magic run straight to Detroit, but the wisdom coming out of Black Bottom is for everybody. In much the same way that Hamilton had in its first cast a very heavily Black cast to invite everyone in, I make Black Bottom is a Black-centered world that everyone can find themselves in. Black Bottom is for everybody who's determined to get from trauma to transcendence and bring some folks along with them. And have a good time doing it.
This book is a lot of fun, and I almost want to ask, how did you decide on which saints to include in your book? And did you have to leave any out?
Oh, I had to leave so many out. It was hard to get to 100 saints. As I said, I spent those first 2 years reading Ziggy's columns. I found about 1,000 of them and figuring out who were the 100 most important people to him. Because originally, since I didn't know I was doing a Saints Day book, I was doing a regular novel, I thought I could probably interweave 100 people in. As I decided I wanted to focus on a Saints Day book and 1 week at a time with a few movable feasts, I came up with 61. But to get into the book, there's a threefold test how you made it into the novel. One, Ziggy had to love you. And that had to be indicated by the fact that he had probably mentioned you very affectionately in his columns or whispered your name into the ear of one of his students, including me. Two, you had to be related to Detroit as symbolized by the fact that you had walked through the lobby of the Gotham Hotel, which was the major Black hotel in Detroit, which Langston Hughes had said was the #1 Black hotel in the world. And number three, you had to know something important about moving from trauma to transcendence. You passed all three of those tests, you were definitely in. Although I will say there are some characters of that 100 that got in, depending on what I privileged most, sometimes, and there's certain characters that were always in, like Ziggy's beloved Shirley MacNeille and Sammy Davis.
You created a museum of these saints too. Where did you get the idea to do that?
Well, that was a COVID creativity. Originally, I love working in conjunction with other artists. And remember I said at the very beginning, I'm very concerned with oral language, and I'm concerned with people who, my novels tend to be, to some degree, complicated and dense in certain ways, although everyone's saying this is the most readable one. And some chapters are as short as 3 pages. One is only 1.5 pages. None, I think, is longer than 7 pages. And you can just read a single chapter, so it's very readable. But I still, for some people who really don't have even basic language skills, but I thought these stories could be so significant too. I work with Jimmy James Green to translate each chapter into a collage portrait. We worked over 4 months together on these individual portraits that would translate an entire novel into a portrait. And we were going to take those to 4 places. Or one that I think was, we were hoping to be invited to the Library of Congress. We had certain places we wanted to go. And we got invited to all of them. And then COVID hit, you're not going anywhere. And this amazing work had been done. But fortunately, another theory I had about incarcerated people. And I had thought, what if we make playing cards? So to do that, I had all of the portraits digitized with the hope of making playing cards for incarcerated people and for people who had lower reading skills and for children. So instead of playing war, they could play peace with our playing cards. Those digitized files meant it was possible that, so I could no longer travel anywhere. We could take all the paintings with us if we could figure out a way to build out a digital museum. That was originally just a dream, and I found actually a 13-year-old girl to help me make that dream, along with a program out of Athens, Greece. We took it together, we built out a museum. Can we take you on a tour of it?
Yes, we are about to take a tour of the Saints Museum now, and I think that girl brought you some magic when she created
Maddie Ewing. She was the one person who could figure out how to work this program. Not even that I could afford. We tried all kinds of people, but she does a lot of gaming. And she helped someone like me who's very dyslexic figure out I could describe a museum, and you're about to see the Black Bottom Saints Museum.
So give us a tour.
So here's the exterior of it. It's on the virtual Detroit River, and you'll see it says Orchestra Space. That's where the Gotham Hotel stood. We're entering in. This is the hidden saint. This is Eartha Kitt. She's protesting the Vietnam War, and you see the symbols for all 4 seasons. The book is divided into seasons. It will begin in the summer because it's going to begin on Father's Day at Ziggy's Extravaganza. So the first gallery we're about to enter into is the Gallery of Summer. And right here, you're going to see Robert Hayden, the first saint in the book. He will become the first Black poet laureate of the United States. His cocktail is a riff on a Walt Whitman cocktail, because Robert Hayden loved using traditional literature, such as W.H. Auden, to talk about the underclass Black life and Black bottom itself. Here is Nancy Johnson, a saint I want to send out to you, Kate. She herself was a librarian, along with Sadie Pryor is a librarian. They share a card, and Sadie Pryor is not only a librarian, she's going to be getting lifeguards for Black kids in beaches in Florida. But because she's a librarian, she's going to underscore the idea that the most important place to educate someone is not always a classroom. Here we've entered into the gallery that is fall, and the most serious saint of all. This is Tanya Blanding. Tanya Blanding is a 4-year-old girl who was killed in her own home in the summer of 1967. She's the little girl that Ziggy never gets a chance to teach. The saints of fall are the saints that remind us she was shot down by a Michigan state trooper. The saints of fall remind us that there are structural obstacles to racism that individual excellence cannot overcome. The saints of fall remind us that sometimes you can be too hard up against this. Here is Elsa Roxborough, another saint of fall. She will commit suicide. She will be the first, before she does that though, she will be the first Black woman to attend the University of Michigan and live in the dormitories, because her gangster father will sue the state of Michigan to let her live there. She will produce Langston Hughes plays. She will be best Arthur Miller in a playwriting contest, but it is actually Black Mental Health Week right now. And she's important to remember that sometimes you can do a lot of amazing things and lose your life. Here is Della Reese, another saint of fall. She has a wonderful drink called The Last Lick. She was a victim of domestic violence, but she's also a survivor and a triumph over it. And her drink is a memorial to every woman who stood up against the person who was abusive, and every woman and every person who stands up with the woman, insisting on her right to be safe in her own home. Della Reese, The Last Lick. There is Billy Eckstine, who spent so much wonderful time in Kansas City. He's one of our saints of fall. Another saint of fall is LaVern Baker. I'm going to tell you more about her. LaVern Baker spent some quality time in Kansas City at the Orchid Room. What I love about her here is she started off as Little Miss Sharecropper. She would sing up in Chicago, not in silk, but in overalls and a straw hat as Little Miss Sharecropper, because she said she didn't want to forget the ones left behind. But we're moving into the Winter Gallery. These are the saints. And here's another one that has a great Kansas City connection. Lloyd George Richards will begin life as a shoeshine boy, but he will go on to be the dean of the Yale School of Drama. And he will discover August Wilson and produce and direct some of his plays. But before that, he will direct Raisin in the Sun on Broadway. And what does that have to do with Kansas City? You all have one of the most amazing theater programs in the United States, celebrating and putting forth Black theater. Billy D. Parker is one of those men who's working on the assembly line, creating that great audience. and celebrating the bars and bars as a location of Black politics, art, and unions. You've got a space of your own I'm going to talk to you about in a moment. But these are the saints of winter. They are the saints that if our one person resiliency and grit schools, if you can get over a hard corner, if you can do the impossible in your journey from trauma to transcendence, it's probably because you had one of these saints of winter, these geniuses of grit and resilience, like Lucille Ellis, who will run Catherine Durnham's place, like Nellie Hill Trapp, who was one of the great starlets and stars of the Black cinema. Oh, but here we've got John White, the man who ran the Gotham Hotel. This is a hotel that gets knocked down in the urban renewal that's really functioning as Negro removal, because some people couldn't look over petty sins to great virtues. Shirley MacNeille is one of these great saints of spring, the people who get to pure thrive, past survive. She's the woman who will bring transcendental meditation to the United States, and every year she would write Ziggy's Youth Colossal programs. She's just an amazing, there's Moms Mabley, who spent quality time in Kansas City, so many, Dr. Alf Thomas, who is a Black man who will own his own island between Detroit and Canada and found 2 different hospitals. He will, it's a wonderful sort of hidden story of Black thriving. Here we have Teddy Rhodes, who even Tiger Woods said was perhaps the greatest golfer that ever lived. He will start off golfing in Nashville, but he will spend a lot of time in Detroit, and he will pass through Kansas City. Here is Ziggy Johnson, and there in the far right, that is me in my Youth Colossal costume circa 1964. And he is the patron saint of small fry. This is his Thrive Gallery. Here you're going to go in the virtual museum. You can come back. I'm going to tell you in a moment how to get here. And if you click on the cocktails in this bar, you can get the libation for the feast day of Joe Louis. That's Dawn Comes Sweet. You will also get the recipe for, I think here is the 66 Rue Pigalle, which is the feast for Bricktop. It's made with Old Tom gin and strawberries. The little seeds in the strawberries look like Bricktop's very freckles, and the pinkness of the dress looks like Bricktop's hair. Here is the feast of Ethel Waters, which is the twice told story. And that's going to remind you that Ethel Waters published 2 autobiographies. And something you won't know about them, which is extraordinary, in the first one, she talks about her own mother being raped. At a time when people didn't even speak of these things, she wrote about it and she published it. As I said, here you see an actual map to the galleries for when you come back on your own. You see that summer, these are the saints that are about the roots of the Black experience. Fall are the saints that remind us that individual excellence cannot overcome structural racism and structural obstacles. Winter are the saints that show us that we have extraordinary cultural grit. And spring are the saints that argue that we must get to thrive, thrive, thrive despite. We have some wonderful sponsors to help bring this to you. When you spend time with us, particularly Google Fiber, who spent a lot of money making this possible. But we are just so grateful to the saints themselves who lived these extraordinary lives, and the opportunity I had through Ziggy to write and honor these saints. If you want to find the saints yourself and come back and take a nice long tour, go to www.alicerandall.com, www.alicerandall.com. And when you get to that, click on Press Kit, because we've had to hide it. And only people who come to one of these virtual events get to know where it is until we make it available to everyone at Christmas. So you go to www.alicerandall.com, you go to the Press Kit, you scroll all the way down, and when you see some flashing cards that look like this, you double click on that. That's the Easter egg, and you give it a whole minute or two to download. Wait, don't click on anything until it says the museum is built and it says all your items have been added. And you can spend, we hope, a couple of hours. If you click on any one painting, you're going to get who that person is the patron saint of. You're going to get a quotation from that chapter. So you're going to get a little bit of literature and a lot of love and some beautiful Jimmy James Green art. And I hope you spend a lot of time there. We've got on the website also a Spotify playlist for you, so you can listen to music at your leisure while you're in there.
I did all of that last weekend. See, folks, I promised you a lot of surprises tonight. And the Spotify playlist, that one is a new one for me. So I can't wait to cue that up and listen to that the next time I'm working from home. I saw, I'm glad you pointed out all the Kansas City Black Bottom Saints. I thought I saw Sammy Davis in there. Who are the Saints that Kansas Cityans should know? And isn't there a Kansas City Saint who makes an appearance in Black Bottom Saints?
There are quite a few. Well, first, I want you to notice Sammy Davis. One of the reasons, first of all, Sammy Davis performed in Kansas City many, many times, and particularly enjoyed performing in Kansas City. One of the reasons he's a saint, you may think you know all about Sammy Davis, but you may not know that he had two dads, that his father and his quote unquote uncle, Will Maston, raised him, and he was on the road with them, and he loved his two fathers, and he had a non-traditional family, and he was, quite an extraordinary person. He also has done my favorite rendition of the song Kansas City, but it's not for the song Kansas City, but for his beloved time in Kansas City when he was young crooner on the what we called, some people say, tough on black asses on that circle, but my beloved Butterbeans and Susie renamed it for themselves, tough on Butter's ass. We're going to get to that in a bit, but a lot of my saints came through Kansas City. But Sammy Davis, and I wish we could play you his version of Kansas City, and because when he's talking about 12th and Vine, and I want to say that one of the weird connections between Black Bottom and Kansas City is in 1937, you had something that happened to us in the early 60s, but it happened to you in 1937. You had your Governor Stark declared war on 12th Street. And in 1937, he actually knocked down, I believe, very important, he declared all of these important music venues. He declared war on them by claiming that they were just outposts of crime. And it really had a chilling effect on Black music in Kansas City. I think your musicians union, which opened up as the Colored Musicians Union in 1917. Now, my Ziggy was born in 1914. So your Colored Musicians Union comes along right after this. And I like to think that it was moving along as Ziggy was growing, it was growing. And your Lincoln Theater, my drink, I've made a special secret drink tonight. I'm not even telling you what it is, but I'm calling it the Lincoln Theater. The Lincoln Theater was an amazing Black theater in Kansas City. It was one of the things that brought both the vaudeville and the blues to Kansas City, and brought Toba with all of its great artists, including Butterbeans and Susie, including Bubbles and Buck. I would say literally 3/4 of the Black Bottom Saints had actually moved through Kansas City. But other ones that are particularly important, there's like a hidden one, the way Eartha Kitt is hidden inside of one of my labor union people. I have to say that Charlie Parker is hidden inside of Billy Eckstine, because Eckstine is one of my saints. But there's no Billy Eckstine doing everything he's doing without Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. And Charlie Parker is pure Kansas City. So he's a hidden saint. And I actually have, I'm gonna see if I can read you just a paragraph. It's not, I feel everybody gets my books. It's on Audible. So if you want that, But this is the kind of thing that wouldn't have happened in Kansas City because you had some fabulous clubs and people could come down and play these wonderful after hour at the African American Musicians Union. Once you moved, you could come and play there after late at night. But in St. Louis, things weren't as good for Black people when they were playing, and they weren't as good particularly for Eckstine and Charlie Parker. And actually Charlie Parker's family reached out to me after this. And this is Thomas Bullock saying, this is Ziggy saying this. Sometimes we got nasty silly. There was that legendary night when Chocolate Brown Tad Dameron walked through the Plantation Club, drinking out of the ornate wine glasses that decorated the club's tables, with Charlie Bird Parker following behind, smashing the filigreed drinking glasses to protect white patrons drinking out of the vessels that Dameron had quote unquote contaminated. As Bird loudly declared, "Get yourself a jelly jar. Don't contaminate the white folks' wetter water." I loved Tad for writing "If You Could See Me Now" for Sarah Vaughan, but I loved him more for putting his beautiful lips on those ugly Plantation Club glasses. But what breaks it up is Kansas City's own Charlie Bird Parker saying, "Don't contaminate the white folks' wetter water," and giving himself an excuse to break all that hideous Plantation Club crystal. But y'all cannot feel, we're gonna measure, you can't feel too overly great about yourself, though you're gonna end with feeling great about yourselves, because Skipper Mills, the Mills brothers were so successful. They were the first Black super act. All these groups that later, they closed the gap between the barbershop quartet and things that would lead to the Four Tops and the Temptations. These four-part groups owe so much to them, but they would at times, they could perform it as a whole orchestra, do all of the instruments and the voices, so extraordinary. And their father and mother were their managers. They, actually, when they performed in Europe one time, they were in the royal box. His mother sat with the royal king and queen of England. But what their Mills brothers' mother. But what was wild is they said that Jim Crow rode with them so much that Jim Crow was the fifth or sixth Mills brother. And one of the cities that they really had to call out at one point in the paper was Kansas City for the discrimination they were feeling when they were there. It wasn't the only city. They had to call out London at one time. They had to call out Washington, D.C. at one time. But Kansas City is one of the places that the Mills brothers actually had more trouble and had to, about how they were treated when they were off stage. But more times, because of the presence of the Lincoln Theater, the Eblum, the State Theater, because particularly of the presence of the Zombie Club. Now, Ziggy loved Kansas City because when LaVern Baker, before she came back up to the Flame, where she really got her final act together, when she was reinventing herself, moving away from being Little Miss Sharecropper, when she was rediscovering all the amazing Bessie Smith songs, when she would record this whole album of Bessie Smith songs and reemerge wearing her own silk and would become the second woman, not Black woman, second woman period in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Where would she get all of this together? In Kansas City at the Orchid Room. You see, I put all this beautiful purple behind her. And this is an Orchid Room era picture of LaVern Baker. So Kansas City, you were deep. She was born in Chicago, but Kansas City and Detroit turned her into that woman who would become the second woman in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The first one being Aretha Franklin, who makes an appearance in that country song of mine. So when I think of Kansas City, although, as I said, Butter and Sue, and Count Basie, who has a strong Kansas City connection. One of the things that you all may not know about Charlie Parker and Count Basie is they love baseball. And Count Basie, when they go out with him, will field 2 different teams. They play against each other, and that occurs in the book too. And that's Butter and Sue were big supporters of Basie, who is all through the book, as was Ziggy. Ziggy would help him when he was on a diet. They had all kinds of weird conversations. You're going to see the parts of these people you've never seen before, including the good time they were having playing baseball with each other. It's not just the Negro leagues that you talk about. What you don't know is behind the scenes in Kansas City, it was the games performers were playing after hours too. That was also big time in Atlantic City when they would do that. Yeah.
This might be a good place to stop for a cocktail.
I think once we think about what was going on with the Mills brothers in Kansas City is a great time to have a cocktail.
So with that in mind, I want to switch us over quickly to Brian Edwards of Detroit's Double Strained Collective. And he's going to show us all how to make a whole orchestra. This is the libation for the feast day of Skipper Mills. So get out your cocktail shakers, everyone.
So today we have a cocktail for you called a whole orchestra. So this is a shaken cocktail, so you will need a shaker for this. So first things first, you're going to want to take the equivalent of about like half a lime of juice. So I'm going to say that's about 3/4 of an ounce. Take that, dump that right into your cocktail shaker. And then you want to follow that up with 1 jigger of Old Tom Gin, which is 1.5 ounces. Dump that right in. And then the recipe calls for 2 dashes of grenadine. In this case, ours is already in a bottle, so I'm going to put in 1/4 ounce of grenadine. Not much, just a little splash. All right, so once we have that, we are going to load up with some ice. And we're going to top it off, give it a little shake. All right, now that that's nice and cold, got our nice little Nick and Nora cocktail glass here. We're gonna strain this right in. Nice rosy pink color. Beautiful drink. So here you have it, a whole orchestra.
It's the music of that video that really caught my attention, Alice, while I was looking at it. This is the simplest party in a glass. Even I could make that cocktail.
I love that one. And I also love that the Double Strained Collective, which is in Detroit, it's named for W.E.B. Du Bois's double consciousness. And so the whole, and it is actually working on so many hospitality workers are hard hit during COVID. And so they are working to get resources for those people and those workers. And I have loved that commissioning them to make these cocktail videos was a way of helping support them, because I think that cocktail libation art is such an important part of the texture of so many great American cities, and including Kansas City, and very particularly Detroit. So,
who created the cocktail recipes?
Well, I worked on them, but they are all, one of the saints is Bullock, as I told you, there are 2 bartender saints, Bricktop and Thomas Bullock. And Thomas Bullock published a book in 1917 when your musicians, African-American Musicians Union was being born, called The Ideal Bartender. And actually George Bush's grandfather wrote the introduction of it. And so these books, these cocktail recipes are riffs on Bullock's drinks. We don't use all of Bullock's drinks, and they're not exactly, they have evolved. You know, African American Foodways is all about preserving and evolving. And there are a couple of ones, recipes that aren't in Bullock, but that I've been able to document were done by some other African American bartender of that period, and that they had gone into mid-century Detroit cocktail life. But basically it's an honoring of this man, Thomas Bullock, who is starting to get the acclaim that he deserves, but really wasn't noticed, and that he's pouring flames from goblets, from metal goblets in 1917. So when people think of the craft cocktail, they think it's something born in the 21st century, and that some hipster invented it. No, the American cocktail life goes back to actually the period of enslavement, that African American men were distilling spirits, 11,000 gallons a year at Mount Vernon. They were mixing up cocktails. They were bringing their aesthetics to these cocktails. And then they're even publishing cocktail recipes in 1917. But their oldest known African American cookbook we have, which is now out of Paw Paw, Michigan, which is a new book that has only recently been discovered. It even has 4 cocktails in it. And that is 1866 these are recipes that will predate emancipation. So it's very exciting. Like when you go to the Zombie Club on 103 State Street, you're getting multiple arts, not just the musical art. You're getting the taste sensation art.
It is so easy to think of these people as merely historical figures from another time, unlike the one we live in now. But of all these saints, who do you feel is the saint that we need to know today?
I have to say right now, at this particular moment, Lynette Dobbins Taylor. Lynette Dobbins Taylor is the first Black woman who will dance with an American president at his inaugural ball. She will dance with LBJ. But more important than dancing with LBJ, Lynette Dobbins Taylor helps put LBJ into the White House. She's from Alabama. She's born into womanhood, is at a trauma at the age of 14. She was in a lake when her brother began to drown. And in the process of saving her brother and saving her, her father does in fact die. And Lynette Dobbins, the fictional Lynette Dobbins at least, has to knock her brother upside his head in the water to be able to drag him to safety, because he's fighting her every time she's trying to rescue him. Lynette Dobbins, 14 years old, has already graduated high school. She'll go into college that fall. She will graduate college at 18. She will become a teacher and a principal. But she will also be one of the people with her husband, Hobart Taylor, a very wealthy Black man out of Texas, whose father was also wealthy, will help put LBJ in the lighthouse. And so when I think of actually Kamala Harris and what she is doing supporting Biden and getting him in the White House, I think of Lynette Dobbins Taylor. I think of real affirmative action, which is take not one step back, one take steps forward, take into consideration where the starting line is for everyone to determine who's really winning in the race. And I hope the way that Lynette Dobbins Taylor went all the way with LBJ, Kamala Harris is going to help us take Biden all the way to the White House in November. And so that is actually, I think, the saint we need now. But I think we need all of these saints because they are about love and they are about our common cause of people of principle and joy, of people of excellence in industry, and also of people who recognize how much some of us have long been suffering. To go back to Butterbeans and Susie, who spent so much time in Kansas City on Toba, when they started off, the Saints of Fall or the Saints of the Roots of Black Experience, they'd look out at their audience and they'd see whip scars on people's faces. They were willing to do anything they had to do to help those people move towards joy. They realized how hard they had been up against it. And this is a book about virtues, and one of the virtues is recognizing when your fellow person is suffering. And one of the truths is realizing that when we talk about Breonna Taylor, when we say her name, that you remember that 40-pound, 4-year-old girl. If you get shot down in your house by Michigan State troopers, you don't get to move from trauma to transcendence. Some of us have been waiting. My cousin lived on a street called Euclid. That's a street that Tanya Blanding lived on, the street where she was shot down. I was 7 or 8 years old when that happened to her. I've been thinking about her every week and every month of my life since. Some of us are really, really weary waiting for this moment of reckoning. And we still want it to be a moment of love for all of us moving to some transcendence. I think that's something Lynette Dobbins Taylor, who had to watch her father die at a lake on the 4th of July because the watery places for Black people had no lifeguards. She would be happy if we could get to that. So that's the saint I think we need now. The saint who learned to dance after some very hard days, and the saint who was working behind the scenes, lifting as she climbed.
She is time. We have a couple of audience questions.
I'd love to take some questions from the audience.
So what do you think cities like Kansas City and Detroit should be doing to preserve the type of history that you're talking about? Is there a way to go beyond museums and landmarks and actually revive the culture?
Absolutely. I think that we need you need to teach your local history in all of its richness to your students, to your school. You need to tell, that's of the opening lines is of Camelot, that you've got to, the opening lines of Camelot are the first lines of the book. Ask every person if he's heard the story and tell it strong and clear if he is not, that once there was a fleeting wisp of glory called Camelot. You need to tell the story of your 12th and Vine district. You need to gather up the memories of living citizens. You need to invite and digitize. People can do it on their iPhones, family photos, and collect things that they think are unimportant from their pictures of the 50s and 60s, faded Polaroids are happening. Get them to take pictures of them on their phone, collect them. Yes, and virtual museums, there's so many things we can do now. Walking tours are really important. What we can't rebuild, we can create 3-day models of it, virtual reality, to let people see in thin air what was there. And we can look at what was really in that music hall at the very beginning. The music lessons that you're giving right now, there are all kinds of ways, new filmmakers making the films of your lost history, shooting them with their iPhones, empowering that, celebrating that, conversations. Do you even know what you all did for LaVern Baker? Is there any marker for the orchid? I can't find any documentation except for these Black newspapers of your orchid room. But there's somebody potentially on this call tonight, who has a picture of it. And I think having people, and the recipes, family recipes, cocktail recipes. When you think history, you got to know you're making it and it's in your own family. So I think look at your own recipes, write down, interview, yes, engage, but first starts with the young people. I think this is a time that old heads and young voices have to come together, and that middle sandwich too, that we need to empower our young people to get their iPhones into old folks' homes. And people are eager to tell their stories. Start recording them.
That's a great place to start. And also a great way to teach folks who might not be comfortable with the technology how to use it. Someone wanted to know if you think there's still a nonfiction book to write about Ziggy, about the music and entertainment scene of the Black Bottom neighborhood.
Absolutely. There's a wonderful book called Black Detroit by Herb Boyd, I think won the National Book Award a couple of years ago. He doesn't really talk about Ziggy, but it's a wonderful book about Black Detroit. That Tia Miles has written a beautiful book called City on the Streets. But I've got copies. I'm a reader. I was a child who grew up in libraries, and most of my life I read a book a day, certainly a book a week. So I read other people's books. I'll talk about those too. This one I love, Black Detroit, The Dawn of Detroit, the Tia Miles book. This starts really in the 17th century. I think there is a wonderful scholarly book or a nonfiction book to write about Ziggy in the future. No one was paying any attention to him. I hope that people will start to pay attention to him. The early, what we would call today transgender movement that had different namings and labelings at that moment, that one of the things that came out of this is Ziggy had numerous friends who were queer and also transgender, and celebrating their lives is an important part of what I do in Black Bottom Saints. But it was also a discovery for me to find what a dynamic community already existed that again has been written out of so much of our history. And I challenge you to find those clubs and places and spaces in Kansas City, because when I'm beginning to realize they were there. They were there, and see if you can find them and memorialize and celebrate our early days, our early people who were brave and bold and creative and gender nonconforming. All of these things are there if you ask the questions and look deep enough.
Your museum could grow by leaps and bounds beyond the 61 that you included virtually, which brings me to another audience member's request. We know we can't post the instructions for accessing the museum, but before we...
Until December, when we will give it up to everyone because of how it was supported, please look for it at www.alicerandall.com and then go to Press Kit, and then scroll all the way down and you'll see some flashing cards that look a little bit like this. And when you see the flashing cards, you double click on that and the museum will download, and you can spend as much time as you want. We also have a website at www.blackbottomsaints.com where you get a free chapter of the book, where you can take a test and figure out who's the saint you need now. We want this to be interactive. One of the questions, this is not a book I want you to read from page 1 all the way through necessarily. You can jump in where you want. You can select your own adventure. It does layer into, I think, my serious, most best novel if you read it in the classic way. But it's a very experimental, wonderful novel if you go in and read 3 pages here, 4 pages there. I say the year begins on January 1st, but everyone's not born on January 1st. And you meet a person not on the day they're born, unless you're their mother or father. You meet them at some dinner party when they're 37 or 62, or at a birthday party when they're 7. You meet them where you meet them. So you meet Ziggy where you meet him by going in. And you'll meet Color Girl that way too. And hopefully what we're finding is and sometimes, right now it's a hard time. A lot of people are taking care of children who are not going to school right now, or they're educating them virtually. And old people, I have lots of people in the sandwich with youngies, little ones below them and older ones ahead of them. A lot of people hit with COVID. But this is a gift. You can just take 5 minutes and get a whole inspiring story. I didn't do that. Ziggy and the Saints did that. They lived these amazing lives. Night Train Lane, who had 2 mamas, one who wrapped him up in newspaper and put him out in the trash. And one, a poor woman walking down an alley, thought she heard a cat that needed put out of her misery. And it was a little boy that she raised. And Night Train's lesson has nothing to do about football that got him in the Hall of Fame. It's everything to do with him always focusing on the mama who lifted him out of the trash and not the mama who put him in it. That was a lesson Ziggy put in front of all of his ballet babes. That's a lesson that Ziggy put in front of me. Spotting to hard-won happy. And that's a lesson I want to, joy is radical. I want you all to spot to hard-won happy. And a great way to do this is Black Bottom Saints has a Spotify playlist, which I hope you do put in the text if you can. You find it. But it also is the only novel I know to have a theme song by the extraordinary Louis York. If there are any Grammy voters out there, I hope you vote for them. They're up for their their album, American Griot. They're up for Grammy nomination right now. They've, Chuck Harmony and Claude Kelly. Chuck has won Grammys in the past. And they just out for love created and recorded and gifted me with a Black Bottom Saints theme song and video. And that's how I love to go out with artists and community. Like Kansas City is this amazing community. I've always wanted to spend time. You're one of the places like Venice, Italy, that I've saved for myself in case something dreadful was happening. And I had a short time. I wanted a really great thing that I get to go to that's still ahead of me. Kansas City and Venice are on the list.
You'll be able to hit us first, I hope. So we're going to use that special music as our curtain music. Folks, please support your favorite online book retailer for a copy of Black Bottom Saints. I'm going to cue the band and thank you, Alice, and good night, everyone. It's been a delight chatting with you this evening, Alice.
It's so wonderful to be virtually in Kansas City. I so wish I could have been with you literally, and I'm so thrilled to have had this time to think about all the amazing music and community.
You come to Kansas City and we will show you all of that.
Yay.
Good night, everyone.
It took the Black Bottom Saints to learn about the joy and the pain. So why don't you get yourself a drink at the bar, raise a glass and let's celebrate the glory of the Black Bottom Saints. I hope that you'll remember their names. In Black Camelot, the music was hot, and everyone knew everyone's name. There's simply no denying that the factory folk caused a revolution in their own special way. It's crazy to think I used to be in the dark. My history was all kind of vague. I guess it took the Black Bottom Saints to learn about the joy and the pain. So why don't you get yourself a drink at the bar, raise the glass and let's celebrate the glory of the Black Bottom Saints. I hope that you'll remember their names. Oh, in Black Detroit, the girls and the boys were dancing with their own kind of flair. And Ziggy lit the fire with one hell of a show. The stars came out for a colossal affair. Oh, it's crazy to think I used to be in the dark. My history was all kind of vague. saints. Oh, to learn about the joy and the pain. So why don't we get ourselves a drink at the bar? Raise a glass and just celebrate the glory of the black bottom saints. Oh, the stories of the black bottom saints. Oh, the glory of the black bottom saints. I hope that you'll remember their names. Oh, all right. I said I hope that you remember their names.